Hey guys, Brett Weiss here. Welcome to another video. If you're new to the channel, please hit that subscribe button. It is super helpful. So as I've gotten older, I've been thinking more and more about anniversaries. When Pong hit 50 and the ColecoVision hit 40 last year. And this year is the 40th anniversary of the great video game crash of 1983. It's just shaking me up a little. I'm getting old. Yeah, so it's time to reflect a little bit. And one thing that's hit me is it's the 25th anniversary of my being a journalist, a writer, a video game journalist, pop culture journalist, and on and on. I've written about a million different topics for so many different publications. It's kind of scary. I've kept all these things in tubs under the bed in the guest room because I've just ran out of space. I used to meticulously put everything I would get published in a bag and board and have it all nice and neat, but it got out of control because I've been at this a long time and I've had a ton of stuff published, and I thought it would be really cool to go back in time and look at some of these cool covers on some of these magazines and newspapers and just talk about it a little bit. From time to time I'll mention that something about my being in the video game industry, and I've gotten a little blowback from people saying, you're not in the industry, you're not a programmer, you're not a developer. It's not about that, it's about being a journalist. And I started this back in 97 and 98, and it really started snowballing. And I've been at it ever since. And yeah, it's been a while. And I've had hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of articles published, and well over 1,000. I think I stopped counting around 1,600 print articles published. And I've had a ton of stuff published online as well. I've kept most of the magazines and newspapers that I've been published in. Maybe that makes me a pack rat. Maybe that just makes me, think it's kind of cool. A friend of mine who writes, he's content just having everything he's ever written, just digital copies. He's content just having the PDFs, but I really do like having the print publications. Really comes in handy today. I'm going to show you guys a few things here briefly, and then we're going to go to the table over there, and I'm going to show you some really cool covers, video games, comics, sports cards. I've written about ridiculous amounts of things, and I thought it'd just be fun to just sort of go through the past and show you guys just some of this really cool art on these magazines and newspapers. It really pops, and it's just kind of fun to look back at just some of the stuff I've written about. So let's check it out, and you can always go to brettweisswords.com if you want to see some of my other writings just for free if you just want to check it out. So very briefly, Game Informer, this was really exciting being in Game Informer magazine. Remember their greatest game of all time? I loved that little feature in their magazine, and of course I did it about my all-time favorite, Mr. Do. Robot magazine, pretty cool. A lot of these magazines are now out of business. I think Robot is still being published. I did one on cartoon robots. Pretty cool, pretty fun. Mystery Scene, but a lot of the publications I used to write for are just gone now, or like the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, they're not accepting freelance work. So it's hard to be a journalist now because so many publications have gone out of business, but I'm still hanging in there. I did an article in Mystery Scene about Livia Washburn-Reisner. She's a mystery novelist. Back issue. This just scratches the surface, guys. We're going to take a look at some really cool stuff. Spidey Super Stories. Who remembers that? Electric Company. It was a little Spider-Man segment on Electric Company, which was a little like Sesame Street, but a little quirkier, a little brainier. And I remember watching Electric Company specifically so I could see those Spider-Man segments. So it was a lot of fun writing about it for Back Issue Magazine. One cool thing about being a journalist all these years and writing about mostly probably 80% of the stuff I've written about is pop culture. Just some of my favorite things. Being able to do deep dives on these subjects and interview so many experts and creators on these great IPs, these great cartoons, movies, video games, and everything. It's just been a lot of fun. Toy Shop. I did an article for them on video games. I believe it was the first video game article perhaps that they had published. So that was neat. Watch for Pitfalls. Pretty cool title there. The editor comes up with the titles. Now this was exciting, guys. Film Facts Magazine. First of all, I love Film Facts Magazine. It's such a great magazine of cult movies, classics, and I did a long feature on Thundar the Barbarian. This was the great show, the cartoon, Saturday morning, that predated He-Man and the Masters of the Universe. It was more serious than He-Man. Frankly, I thought it was quite a bit better. Loved Thundar the Barbarian, and it was really cool. I got to interview Steve Gerber, I believe, for that, and Martin Pasco, some of the writers for that magazine, for that show. Very, very cool. So, Antique West, which is a subsidiary of Antique Week. Pinocchio, my favorite Disney film of all time. Favorite animated Disney, of course. Little Mermaid is second, and I'll have to come up with my list sometime, but I love me some Pinocchio. And for many years, for about a decade, I wrote for the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. Now, they do accept some freelance work, but it's very spotty here and there, especially about entertainment-related articles. Most of their life and art stuff now is just stuff they get off the wire or they reprint from other newspapers, which is very unfortunate. And guys, I think in this video, or definitely I will do this, we're going to go over here and look at some publications. When I get to the Star-Telegram, I'm going to tell you guys what I made for Life and Art's cover articles, what they paid me, and I'm going to talk about what they paid me for, just the smaller articles too, the side articles, like, something shorter. But I did fall, spring, and summer previews for the Star-Telegram for video games, and I did holiday gift guides as well. I wrote a lot about video games for the Star-Telegram, along with a ton of other topics. So hold on tight. We're going to look at some cool video game magazines, all kinds of great stuff, so let's check it out. All right, going to start off by showing you guys some Antique Week and Antique West, which is a branch of Antique Week. Going to show you some of those first, then I'll talk about Star-Telegram and video game magazines and some other stuff. So hang tight. You got a lot of cool stuff to check out. Frazetta's work is now, he's a commercial artist, but his stuff hangs up in museums and sells for hundreds of thousands of dollars. So it's treated like fine art these days, and that was a fun one to do. Big fan of Jaws. Not the first blockbuster movie, but it gets credit for that sometimes. But, dating back to Gone with the Wind and before, there would be movies that were so popular that audiences would line up around the block, which is where that term came from. Still a great movie. Made a lot of people afraid of the beach. Check it out. Video games as collectibles. Now, I've gotten some blowback about writing about video games for Antique Week and about the collectible nature. Hey, don't blame the messenger. I'm just writing about the trend of video games being collectible and not just something to play. Did an article on Wizard of Oz, the books. L. Frank Baum, great stuff. Love me some Charlie Brown. My mom used to take me to used bookstores when I was little, and I would buy those Peanuts little paperbacks that reprinted the comic strips. Flash Gordon, one of my favorite fictional characters of all time. Famous monsters. So many monster kids. So many people were influenced by famous monsters of film, man. So many creators, so many artists and writers and filmmakers. Check it out. Vintage computer collecting. Did a couple of different articles about collecting computers for Antique Week from different angles. Fun stuff. And Zoe Howard, she's collaborated with me on some of my books. She's written stories and some stuff from my new 100 Greatest book. She collaborated with me on this Pokemon article, did a lot of the heavy lifting. Pretty great stuff by her. And check this out, guys. This is my first Antique Week article ever. Actually, this one is from 2010, January 4th, 2010. Article on the Atari 2600. This was my first Antique Week article, and I'm still writing for them today here in 2023. Pretty cool. But I did this one based on Activision in particular, about how the programmers for Activision basically were rock stars of the gaming industry because their names would appear on the boxes and the manuals and stuff, and they were promoted. Pretty cool stuff. I don't know if you guys have read Rob O'Hara's Invading Spaces. It's a fun book, but I did a article on collecting arcade games, and I believe I interviewed Rob. And I think I interviewed my friend Darren Sulfridge as well. It's been a long time. One of the things that convinced McFarlane for me to write and for them to publish a KISS book was that I'd written about them for Antique Week a few times. All right, let's check out some more Antique Weeks. Did a lot of anniversary stories for Antique Week, including Gone with the Wind, 75 years. Antique West is just a regional version of Antique Week. Sgt. Pepper's, great album, Summer of Love. It's always fun writing for Antique Week during October. Got to do a lot of horror stuff. My favorite artist of all time, Van Gogh. Now, check it out, guys. Speaking of Summer of Love, I did a feature on collecting Summer of Love, the 50th anniversary. It's 1967 when the hippies and drifters, etc., flocked to San Francisco. Interesting time period. Another related article about the Merry Pranksters and their cross-country trip. Very interesting stuff. Feature on 8mm films. Very interesting aspect of collecting. Really great covers. Dr. J, my favorite basketball player of all time by far, did a feature on basketball cards, collecting those. Rock and roll t-shirts. One of the cool things about writing for Antique Week is getting to write about some of my favorite things of all time, which is just great. Some of my favorite hobbies and passions. Mickey Mouse. This was an interesting feature to write. Very peculiar collector. He was really interesting to interview. And I actually got to go to this guy's house, Houdini collector, Arthur Moses. And he has a fascinating collection of Houdini memorabilia and is the world's foremost Houdini bibliographer. Has the biggest collection of Houdini books, magazines about him, written works, things like that. Pretty cool. All right, just want to show you guys a little more Antique Week, a few more issues, and then we will go on to video game magazines. I've written about comic books countless times because I wrote for the Comics Buyer's Guide for well over a decade, maybe 14 years or so, I believe. Love Stephen King, one of my favorite authors. Harry Potter. Now, not everything in Antique Week is about antiques. It's for more recent collectibles as well, because it's antique, auction, and collecting newspapers. But most of the stuff is vintage. But we write about more recent stuff as well. Major Planet of the Apes fan. One of my favorite film series of all time. Mad Magazine, Honest Abe, mine and a lot of people's favorite president. That one took a ton of research, but it was very rewarding to get that published. Wonder Woman's New Look, which probably didn't last very long, as I recall, and Green Lantern. Fun stuff. And I would interview collectors, and it was just, man, it's so much fun writing for Antique Week. When I discuss the fact that I've had more than 1,600 articles published in various print publications, I am indeed talking about print. I've done a lot more stuff for online as well, but the bulk of my writing in print has been for Antique Week and its associated publications and the Fort Worth Star-Telegram and Comics Buyer's Guide. But I'm going to show you next some video game magazines. But look at all these issues of Antique Week. I've had stories published in, articles, just a ridiculous variety, mostly pop culture. And I try to get Kiss in there as often as possible, like when I did my 50th anniversary of Rolling Stone magazine and about collecting vinyl. Got Kiss on the cover there. Barbie, Marilyn. And a lot of these issues, I've got more than one article. For a lot, I have the cover feature, but a lot, I'll have 2 or 3 or even 4 articles in one issue because I would do reviews of museums around the country. I would do articles on auction reports, like I would discuss, what sold for what, just reporting on different auctions around the country, but a lot of fun. All right, guys, check out that ridiculous amount of Antique Week. Such a great little newspaper that has kept me going for a long time. Love it. Now let's get to some video game magazines. Most of you know that I write for Old School Gamer magazine, and the exciting thing about Old School Gamer, it is still going strong thanks in part to a recent successfully funded Kickstarter campaign. where it raised over $30,000 to keep the magazine going bigger and better than ever. I'm very excited about that. It is extremely difficult to keep a print publication going these days, not only because of the internet, but also because of printing costs. And I'm really proud of Ryan Berger and company and all the writers for getting this going today. Pretty awesome. Now, briefly, I'll show you the inside of this one. Got a couple of different articles. Sometimes I write under my column of Brett's Old School Bargain Bin, just talking about different games that are excellent and that are cheap, as the title of the column indicates. And in this article, this magazine also had an article on Activision. I interviewed Jim Levy, Activision fame. Talked about how he got involved with Activision. He was an executive with the company, not a programmer, but he was fascinating to talk to. Really great stuff. Enjoyed interviewing him. So let's get to some more video game magazines. All right, guys, who remembers Video Game Trader magazine? Let me know in the comments. It was a fun magazine, definitely independently produced, and it was a lot of fun writing for it. So many great covers, so many great stories. Just a fun publication to write for, so colorful. And I just like supporting these projects, and it was always fun to get published. Check out my buddy Michael Thomason, who at one point had the Guinness Book of World Records for the world's largest video game collection. Now, he got trolled about that, which was ridiculous. People say, oh, it's not the world's biggest video game collection. Well, you have to go through a process for that to happen, and he went through the process. They came out and cataloged his collection, and people were trolling him, calling him a basement dweller and all this other stuff, an incel. The guy's married with a kid and is an amazing guy. Retro Magazine. Who remembers Retro Video Game Magazine? That was published by the infamous Mike Kennedy back when he was still respected in the industry before the Coleco Chameleon debacle. Patrick Scott Patterson, Pat Contry, and some others wrote for Retro Magazine. And gosh, Jeremy Parrish had some articles in there, and yeah, so it was a very nicely done magazine, but it's just too bad Kennedy ruined his reputation with the Coleco Chameleon debacle. All right, guys, let's look at some other video game magazines that have my published work, plus some other odds and ends, including Pen Game Journal. That was fun to write for. Now, guys, over here, these are fanzines, just fan-made magazines. I did these as a labor of love. They were just submitted some free stuff, but, you know, just wanted to support them. Now, Robot Magazine is a very commercial publication. You can find that at Barnes & Noble, etc. Really professional magazine, and it was fun to write for. Did an article on robots and pop music. I did some articles on actual, you know, just real robots as well, you know, real life working robots. Very fun to write for. One of the more enjoyable pieces I did was about robots in video games. Pretty cool. That was fun. And let's see, let's go over here to Toy Shop Magazine. Magazines like these, Toy Shop, Toy Cars and Models, they're long gone, like so many other publications I used to write for. Now this is fun. One cool thing about writing is when I get to do articles featuring friends of mine, some of my buddies, about their car racing hobby. Pretty cool stuff. HO scale slot cars, very cool stuff. Classic Gamer Magazine, that was also a labor of love. The late lamented Classic Gamer Magazine. Now, what was sad about this one, this was the last physical publication, and then the next one was digital, so I did a part 2 article, but the part 2 was just digital only. Now, Opcode Visions actually was the editor and primary writer on that magazine. So far, there's just been one issue. Keep hoping they'll do another one. Game Room Magazine. That was a really nice publication. And I did a feature on pinball books. I like to promote other gaming-related books when I can. Very cool. And Game Room Magazine did a very nice layout for my Mr. Do article. My favorite game of all time. Get that out of the way. Really slick, really colorful. Very nice. Loved having that published. And there you go, guys. Now let's get down to business with Film Facts. One of my bucket lists was getting published in Film Facts magazine, and it ended up happening quite a bit. My friend and I used to sit around talking about one day, years ago, back in the 90s, we would talk about one day, being paid professional published writers. Early to mid 90s, we would have these discussions, and it ultimately ended up happening for me, very obviously and very excitingly. And Film Facts was one of the magazines we would talk about. How exciting would that be to get articles published in there? And I've got articles published in each one of these, including some cover features. Wonder Woman. Pretty cool. Wonder Woman turning 75. That was repurposed from an Antique Week article I did. Just polished it up, made some changes. Same with Flash Gordon. Fun stuff. Mark Hamill the Trickster. And this one, guys, this was really exciting when I got to interview Adam West. Really cool guy. And I actually had him out to our comic book store, mine and my brother-in-law's, back in the early 90s. And then years later, I called him at his home, and he answered the phone, Batcave, and he was so funny and fun to talk to. And I actually, he said he remembered who I was, which was pretty cool, because he did come out to our comic book store. Let's move on to the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, and then we'll do some more magazines and some other things. And I will be telling you guys what I got paid to write articles for the Star-Telegram was. How much they used to pay. And wow, those were the good old days. I had countless articles published in the Star-Telegram over the almost decade I wrote for the publication, and I want to show you guys the video game articles first. I wrote about Video Games Live years before the Television Amico debacle, and I would do a lot of holiday gift guides. Those were so much fun, just talking about the different gift ideas, and they wanted things other than video games a lot of times for these gift guides, so I would do all kinds of different things. Here's another one, gifts for gamers that go outside of the box, such as special editions. And see the old Super NES Mini there, the Super Nintendo Classic Edition. Just things other than standard releases. A lot of fun. Games Without Frontiers, arcade article, Back to the Future about the National Video Game Museum. That was a lot of fun to write. And I did an article on video game books. I like to promote other writers, not just myself, which is, kind of crazy, some people think, but whatevs. Good friends of mine here, Leonard Herman and Michael Thomason. Certain NES guidebook that you guys may have heard of. Playing at the Next Level, Ken Horowitz, another buddy of mine. Pretty cool. All right. Now I did a comparison of the Xbox One and PlayStation 4. That was a lot of fun. And I did a lot of spring, fall, and summer video game guides. In addition to holiday gift guides, did an article on retro arcades in the Dallas-Fort Worth area, including free play. Gaming on the go. More previews. Let's see what this bad boy. Had a lot of cover features for the Star-Telegram, and I will tell you guys what I made writing for them here in just a minute. Now this was a special article to me because several of my friends I interviewed about the Pokemon Go craze. And that was a lot of fun. Pokemon Go and DFW. I enjoyed that. That's pretty much the only time I've spent a lot of time with Pokemon is the Pokemon Go craze. I enjoyed that. Loved getting out in the city and just checking out different, tourist attractions and things where there were Pokestops. Let's get to some more video game articles in the Star-Telegram. All right, let's check out more video game articles that I had published in the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Again, more spring, fall, summer, etc. previews. This was a lot of fun. It helped me stay right on top of the video game industry, which is really cool because, you know, being a retro gamer and playing so many old games, it was great having a financial reason to keep current and check out the new stuff. A lot of fun. Now, Nintendo had me out to Dallas. They invited me to Dallas to a mobile truck kind of situation, like a big bus, where they had the Wii U set up, and I got to play it weeks before, or months or something, before the console actually came out, and it was a lot of fun. And I was really excited about it. I thought it worked great. I was really enthused about the games I played on it, and I thought it was going to do a lot better than it ultimately did. And before other people had even played it, when I posted my article online, I got accused of being a Nintendo shill, which is funny. I don't know what it is about gaming, but if you like a device, people call you a shill oftentimes. Kind of crazy. But I loved it, and I hated that it didn't do as well as it did, but I'm really excited that the Switch is kicking butt and may become the highest selling game system of all time. We'll see. See here, let's go down here. Buys of Summer, and this was cool. One of my video game, or a few of my articles over time, but one of my video game articles got called out on the cover of the Fort Worth Star Telegram. Now, most of my video game articles were in the Life and Art section, and a lot of them were cover featured on the Life and Art section, but to get mentioned on the cover of the paper, you know, the entire paper, was pretty darn cool. Star Telegram would pay me $400 per article for Life and Art's cover features, and then they would pay me $250 for articles that were not actually on the cover, the, you know, smaller either sidebar articles or articles that were inside the Life and Art sections. But the one that were cover features, I would get $400, which was pretty solid. Not enough to get rich or anything, but you know, not bad at all. And then over time, they lowered toward the end of me writing for them a few years ago, they lowered their rates, and then ultimately I started writing for my same Star Telegram editor, but online for Culture Map, and that didn't pay as well. But anyway, let's look at some more Star Telegram articles. All right, let's look at a few more Star Telegram issues before we get on to Comics Buyer's Guide. Of course, I love Planet of the Apes. This was a special article because I got to write about a local convention and interview a good friend of mine, Sierra Caballero. That was awesome. And I got to write about the new Justice League movie that was coming out and just sort of catch readers up to speed on the current incarnations of these characters. A couple of more video game issues. This was awesome. Article about comic book films. That was a lot of fun. I love that they featured heavy metal so prominently on the cover there. This was another special article. Wrote about good friends of mine, comic book geeks. Comic book geeks in love. That was awesome. And this is special to me as well. I think this was my first Life and Arts cover feature, dated October 25th, excuse me, October 25th, 2011, about family-friendly horror films. Now, one thing about writing for the paper, they would assign me articles, but just as importantly, I pitched a ton of articles. You know, they would periodically tell me, hey, we want you writing about this. This was really cool. Interviewing Emma Caulfield from Buffy. You know, periodically I would, they would send me on assignments. They would say, hey, we want you to write about the Fort Worth Zoo. So we're going to send you there and interview this person and this kind of thing. Fine. I would attend, openings of restaurants and bars and stuff, free food, etc. That was always great. But man, so much of my time and energy was just spent on pitching, just ideas to the Star Telegram. So I had to brainstorm it like crazy. Let's look at a massive stack of Star Telegram issues. Can't show you them all, but then we'll go on to the Comics Buyer's Guide. Hey guys, I decided to stay with the Star Telegram a little longer because it was such an important part of my life. It was so exciting. This is a Halloween playlist. I did a lot of music playlists for the Star Telegram. This is the trip I went to the zoo I told you guys about. This was a fun article for me because I got to interview several of my friends who owned stores in the area, what geek culture, that kind of thing. Movie roundup. I did a ton of movie roundups. Article on TV dads. A lot of Star Wars stuff I wrote about. Christmas Story. That was a fun one. And just to show you guys the variety of stuff I did, here's one about a Fort Worth Dixieland musician. Yeah, I was a working journalist in the trenches for many years, and I would have to write about pretty much anything they would send my way just to, make it as a journalist. Now, I showed a couple of more video game related things. In the back there, you can see many more Star Telegram stuff. I just don't have time to talk about. I'd be here all day with you guys, but I want to show you a couple of things here. When the Angry Video Game Nerd, when the Angry Birds movie was coming out, I did a feature on other video game movies, and of course, Tron. Let's see what else I included. It's been a while. War Games, Final Fantasy Spirits Within, which I thought was underrated. Wreck-It Ralph, Last Starfighter, Mortal Kombat, Cloak and Dagger. Pretty cool. And another one, I did a feature on Back to the Future 2 and what it got right. This was like an anniversary of the film. And one thing I wrote about was the fact that old Nintendo games are valuable antiques today. This was October 21st, 2015, and this was how good Back to the Future 2 was at predicting the future, and this was a date mentioned in the film. And we're not there with flying cars, but Nintendo games. Video games are lucrative antiques. In 1989, which is when Back to the Future 2 came out, video games from previous console generations were essentially worthless and very few people thought of them as collectibles. But in the film, you can see box copy of Jaws and Burger Time for the Nintendo NES displayed prominently in the window of an antique store. Today, retro game collecting is huge. Certain rare cartridges can command thousands of dollars, and there's even a National Video Game Museum coming to Frisco in December. All right, guys, and like I said, there's tons more Star Telegram stuff, but anyway, let's get on to Comics Buyer's Guide. I was super excited to start writing for the Comics Buyer's Guide in I believe it was early 2000s. I wrote for them for about 14 years, and I didn't do cover features. I did a few interior features, but mostly I was on the review crew and wrote reviews. Countless reviews for the newspaper and this tabloid-sized publication, which later became a magazine, which I'll show you guys that as well. But I wrote, so many reviews for Marvel, DC, independent publication, kids comics, you name it. Now here, it was the reading room, and there's one of my reviews right there, Spidey and the Mini Marbles. And I would go to the comic shop each week, pick up my issues, just ones I wanted to read for fun, and the ones that I'd be reviewing. And here's the little box with a picture of me, the review crew. Brett Weiss, a former owner of Fantastic Comics and Cards. Brett has collected comics for almost 3 decades. He is now a full-time freelancer writing reviews. Long out-of-date address. Here we go. Nightwing, number 80. Anyway, so check it out. There's my collection of Comics Buyer's Guide that I've got reviews in and a few interior features. For each issue, I would have between 2 and 4 reviews typically. That was the typical amount. Sometimes 1, but usually between 2 and 4. So that was great fun writing for that publication. And that was really the first time that I started writing on a national scale and regularly in a national publication. And let me show you when the CBG, as they call it, became magazine format. Let's check some of those out. All right, at some point, CBG decided it made more sense to become a magazine instead of a tabloid, like a monthly magazine, because the market was changing. People were getting their information online instead of through Comics Buyer's Guide, just as far as news and stuff goes. And so it became a magazine. And again, I was on the review crew, and I wrote a ton of reviews, including this one for Brave and the Bold number 15 with Batman and the Flash. You guys know that the Flash is my favorite superhero of all time. Pretty big Batman fan too. Again, lots of colorful covers. And I'm going to show you guys some more Comics Buyer's Guide here in just a second, where the magazine became square bound. So let's check that out. At some point, Comics Buyer's Guide became a square bound publication. Pretty cool. Lots of reading material in these. Tony Isabella, Peter David, all kinds of excellent comic book writers wrote for Comics Buyer's Guide. And there's a stack. I can't show you all these, or like I said, we'd be here all day. But again, I've got reviews and all these issues. And I want to show you this, guys. Comics Buyer's Guide number 1600. Yeah, the publication went for a long time. And issue number 1600, 16 comic books you need to have. And I wrote about several different comics, including Hate 1 through 15. That's a hilarious independent comic book. Hate, Fantagraphics in the 90s. Man, that was so much fun. By Peter Bagge, such a funny comic book. I read it, my wife would read it, and my roommate at the time, Glenn, would read it. Man, great stuff. And yeah, so there you go. Again, more colorful covers, lots of content. And it was a different time, man. You know, the magazine industry is still a thing, but it seems like most magazines are just these special edition ones that are like $15, $16 each. But man, back in the day, I miss those times. But you know, it's convenient to read online, but man, I miss physical media like this, and I miss a lot of the publications I used to write for. Now guys, last but not least, let's just check out some of the random publications I wrote for here and there. Just an odd mix of different magazines and things. All right, guys, we're getting down to it. I'm going to show you some random magazines and different publications I wrote for, and then we'll go in my office and just check out my books real quick. Back Issue and Alter Ego were fun comic book magazines to write for. Very cool. This stack here, random publications, mostly published by the Fort Worth Star-Telegram. I wrote a lot of stuff that I didn't get credited for. The Aristide Event Center, how exciting. Advertorial. I wrote a lot of ads for the Star-Telegram as well. I didn't even keep those, but I did keep the ones I wrote in magazines. There's articles I wrote in here too. Like for K Magazine, I did this cover feature on a guy that created mixed drinks, made cocktails. I wrote for Indulge, which was a magazine for wealthy people. Just all kinds of stuff. Definitely a down in the trenches type of journalist. I wrote for Scary Monsters magazine a little bit. Just they didn't pay. One of the few publications ever that I wrote, you know, the fanzines I mentioned earlier and Scary Monsters. But I just did that as a labor of love. Now check out something interesting here, guys. Remains, this graphic novel. It's got my quote, one of my quotes from Comics Buyer's Guide. Pretty cool. And Treasures magazine. Pretty spiffy keen. Did a feature on Elvis Presley. Very colorful and cool. Hogan's Alley, very rarely published magazine. It just comes out every once in a while. The Writer, Native Peoples, check it out. I did an article on comic book store owner Chuck Rosansky's really cool native pottery collection. His Pueblo pottery, I should say. That was a fun interview and I learned a lot. And check this out, guys. This was one of my most exciting gets. For Fangoria magazine, I entered very reclusive author Bentley Little. Doesn't do that many interviews. He's had his books sell really well. He's not really a household name, but his stuff is a little like Stephen King, very good novelist. He doesn't use the computer, so he corresponded through his, I guess his agent or his assistant or whatever, And he wrote, when I sent him the questions, he wrote them back, he typed them out on paper, because he doesn't, I think he might use a computer just for the word processor, or the, for Word, but he didn't use email or the internet. So very interesting character. That was really exciting. All right, guys, let's go to my office and just check out my books real quick. Hey guys, I thought it'd be fun to end up this lengthy video in the corner of my office where I have some of my mementos, including this article I wrote about how I broke through and became a success as a freelance writer. And here's my one of my awards from Walter Day, pretty cool. And I just wanted some representations of articles I was excited about, including Thundar, and a review of Keep Watching the Skies. Some of you may know that my 100 greatest books were inspired in part by Keep Watching the Skies by Bill Warren, because he covered a great decade of science fiction, and I thought I would cover a great decade of video games. And my series has continued, obviously. This was the first Star Telegram article I wrote about James and Livia Reisner, novelists. And then here's one of my favorite comics buyer's guides reviews, The Dark Knight Strikes Again. And then there's my Mr. Do article. Just thought it was cool being in Game Informer. And then, as you guys know, books upon books, the omnibus books, the 200 greatest books, a retro pop culture book. I would love to do a sequel to this one of these days and reprint some more of the articles from my magazines in bound form like that. And of course, the classic home video game series. Many of you know that this book was the world's first to feature complete guides to the Atari 5200, 7800, Intellivision, ColecoVision, Vectrex, and on and on. And this was the world's first book to cover complete libraries of the NES, 7800, and Master System with write-ups for each game. And then, of course, it continued through the Genesis, TurboGrafx, and Neo Geo, again, a first. And there's hardcover versions, and the world's first and only Kiss Encyclopedia. Very exciting. Gene Simmons tweeted that one time, which was really cool. Here's the early cover for that. That's the one McFarlane sent me, and I'm like, that looks like something about Pantera. Need something more Kiss-like. So I sent him a picture to use, and they basically did a Gene Simmons thing here. They didn't want to use a picture of the band on the cover because they were afraid about Gene Simmons, possible, getting legally involved or whatever. Anyway, and there's my book of short stories, The Arcade and Other Strange Tales. All right, guys, thank you so much for watching. Thank you for liking. Thank you for subscribing. And comment with whatever you want to say. This has been a long one. Thank you so much for watching. We will talk to you in another video.